Good evening. We're calling to order the October 7th meeting of the Legislative Affairs Subcommittee. We'll all rise and salute the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Clerk, call the roll.
Roll call of the members of the Legislative Affairs Subcommittee. Councillor Celski. Here. Councillor Powers. Here. Councillor Rizzo. Here. Councillor Zambuto is absent. Council President Guanasso. Here. And Chairman Keefe.
Here.
Here.
And Councillor Zambuto
Present.
is making his way to a seat right now. So we have one motion in front of us presented by Councillor McKenna, and I'd also like to mention that State Representative Vincent is in the crowd tonight, and she'll be speaking on this motion. Madam Clerk, if you'll read the motion.
Motion presented by Councillor McKenna that the following special legislation be approved and forwarded to the state delegation. An act relative to duck hunting in densely populated areas. Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives in general court assembled, and by the authority of the same as follows. Section 1. No person shall hunt fowl by firearm, arrow, or other means on the tidelands or 1,500 yards seaward from the shoreline at Revere Beach or the Point of Pines Beach in the city of Revere to ensure the public safety of the residents of the city of Revere and visitors to Revere Beach and its use as a place of recreation and open space. Whoever commits any offense described in this section shall be punished by a fine of not less than $2,000 nor more than $5,000. Section 2, this act shall take effect upon its passage.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And with this being Councilor McKenna's motion, I'd like to have her clarify.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So currently, the Duck Hunting Act allows duck hunters to shoot ducks 500 feet from a dwelling. What Representative Vincent has done is put this in front of the state delegation to move it to 1,500 yards. And the reasoning for this is because of the fact that I don't know if anybody has seen these little black boats with these duck hunters in them. They're very close to the shore. We have people walking dogs. What's happening is we're finding shell casings on the beach. We're finding dead ducks on the beach. And I know for a fact that shells in a windy day, they can travel. So we just don't want any pedestrians or residents to be hurt in any kind of way. So this is why we're moving it. We're not against hunting, but we want to make sure that our residents are safe from the Point of Pines on Revere Beach. Thank you. And I'm going to ask Representative Vincent to come up and speak, please.
Thank you. Before we hear from, we'd like to hear from Representative Vincent, and then we'll go to the council. Please come up, Representative Vincent. I know that you've been a strong advocate for this as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Joanne and to all of you who are sponsoring or hopefully will sponsor this. In November through January, we start getting calls in my office, I don't know about anyone else, about the sound of gunshots. So I just want to say thank you, Councillor McKenna, for introducing this. But let me just set the scene for you. I know that the councillor alluded a little bit to it, but picture you walking on America's first public beach on a brisk, sunny morning, and all of a sudden you hear pop, 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 pop. Or you're a windsurfer taking advantage of a beautiful winter day and you can surf on Revere's Beach, and you see hunters, and it's not just 1 or 2 local hunters. We're talking maybe 3 to 6 camouflage boats with maybe 3 to 5 hunters in each boat, and they're all shooting all at the same time. It's kind of strange. I mean, any reasonable person would not expect to see hunters as you're walking your dog on Revere Beach or as you're having coffee. I think what's even a little bit more upsetting is the fact that There's a couple of bus stops in the Point of Pines right on Rice Ave where children are waiting for buses and school buses. And what happens is that I've had parents calling my office saying, oh my God, my kids were frightened. You know, this is a day when you hear pop, 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 and you hear gunshots, you know, with school shootings and mass murders, you don't think of someone doing something like duck hunting, especially in an urban setting like Revere. So in 2009, as crazy as it sounds, hunters can actually be only 500 feet from a dwelling, which means that they pretty much have very easy access close to the shore. So I'm asking that you will support Joanne's home rule petition, and that might make it easier. In recent years, this has become an issue, especially now that we have a company that brings many, many hunters to the region. And we're not against hunting, but it's any reasonable person would understand that you don't start shooting, you know, less than 500 feet from the shore where people can actually see. People hear it all over the beach area. So, you know, my bill and this home rule that is before you only affects the city of Revere. It does not affect any other community. It's strictly for the city of Revere and America's first public beach. You know, with the thousands of apartments that we have and a hotel coming up, I just can't imagine for the life of me how this would be good for the city. It's not aimed at hunters. Hunters would still have rights to hunt, just not as close to this overdeveloped area, but they will be able to hunt less than a mile from the shoreline. So I hope you all support this, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Madam Representative. We also have Councillor Powers wanted to speak on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to commend Councilor McKenna for bringing this forward, and also Representative Vincent for moving toward this legislation. And it's something that I feel where it is a home rule petition and Representative Vincent is supporting this, there should be no question at all. And it's not just Rice Avenue that this affects or the boulevard, it affects Mills Avenue also, and the distance between the water and Mills Avenue, where kids do wait for school buses, is probably maybe even less than 500 feet in some cases. So I think 1,500 feet is excellent. This is what we're talking about, right? Your legislation is talking about 1,500 feet?
So unfortunately, we had, because this has been a very difficult, with colonial ordinances being the way they are, in order to have a perfect piece of legislation, we couldn't. Because if we included Mills Ave, it would be marsh area, and that would be a lot more difficult to pass. So the river is not part of the legislation. It is strictly the open ocean, and the open ocean is the only area that would be affected by this bill. I'm hoping, should we get this passed, that in the future we could look at Mills Ave, because I agree, Mills Ave is probably as much, if not more, affected. The only problem is that that is part of the marshland, and the marshland and the hunters, I think it would be a lot harder sell. Right now, all we're speaking about is open ocean.
Now, let me ask another question. Would this, assuming that, and I'm in favor of this, I'm supporting your, and Councilor McKenna, but would this sort of cause hunters to go over into that area there more?
I would think not, because you still have Nahant is not part of this legislation. Winthrop is not part of this legislation. Lynn is not part of this legislation. So they all have hunters. And in all honesty, the 500 feet from a dwelling, I actually think if they were following the rules and regulations, they probably wouldn't be doing very much hunting in that area,
Yeah.
but they do. And so I really don't have the answer on whether or not, I couldn't predict whether or
No,
not that.
I understand that, but it's just a thought that we don't want
It's
to
a
push
possi-
hunters over, the can't hunt on the other side over there.
It's a possibility, but unfortunately, when House Counsel wrote the legislation, they felt that if we did include the marsh area and the river, we would definitely not have a chance of this
Okay.
legislation moving forward.
Maybe that's something we can look at a little later down the road, but
So I think
I
baby-
think it's an excellent piece of legislation.
Yes, I think baby steps, I think if we were able to get, this will be a first. It's a long shot, but it's something that we need to do to protect. I mean, when you have that many residents living and in an area, especially now on this very developed area, you need to, it's ridiculous to hear gunshots all day long. And they go from morning to.
I've seen them, I've
early
heard
evening.
them, and I know
Yes,
the
and I had
problem
people
there.
calling constantly,
Yeah.
some kids are frightened, I've had a soldier actually call that he has post-stress disorder, and that just triggers it off. I've had people in the Jack Satter house calling me, people in the other condominiums, so people in the apartment buildings. People have been really upset. And granted, the bullets don't go far enough to actually kill or hurt someone other than the ducks, but it's the perception and the noise and the sound and everything that goes along with it.
And it could happen, somebody could get hurt. And I want to commend yourself and Councillor McKenna for bringing this forward. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Councillor
Chairman.
Powers. Councillor Morbido, then we're going to go Novoselsky, Councillor Janino, and actually, correct, Councillor Novoselsky first. We'll go straight down the line.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I know the representative mentioned colonial rules and laws, and that's where the laws right now in the books of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts exist from colonial times, and it's very difficult to change colonial rules statewide. So I'm glad that the House Counsel put this together to cover Revere. Now, I think it was, I don't know if it was 10 years ago that you and I spoke, and I was approached by one of my constituents on Ocean Avenue complaining about gunshots that they heard 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, 6:30 in the morning, just at daybreak as the sun was coming up. And he said, I have proof. I said, what do you mean you have proof? And he gave me this photograph of all the buckshot shells that were lying in the water on the shoreline, on the whole length of the beach. Now, these buckshot shells were coming in on storms because there's no rules or regulations of what these shooters, can do with the buckshot shells. Because when they pop a buckshot shell, it falls in their boat. They don't want it in their boat. They throw it in the water. The worst part is when they kill these ducks, they don't even collect them. They just let them float. And many of them come onto the beach. And it's ridiculous. So I'm glad that, unfortunately we had to wait this long to get something written, because, I talked to the representative about it, and even Bruce Berman from Safe Harbors, he and I, were discussing that, and he's very interested in this piece of legislation. And I'm glad that the representative brought it forward. I'm glad Joanne pushed her to go this route, and we had to go this route. So it's exciting, and I'm definitely endorsing this. It falls right in my neighborhood, right in Ward 2. It's Ward 2, Ward 1, Ward 2, and Ward 5 that get all the action on it, and we're tired of it. So hopefully this will pass, and environmental police will enforce it. We know the enforcement of a lot of things in this city are weak, but we want that from the state, for them to enforce it and let these shooters know what's going on, that they can't do it in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. We have a few other councils that wishing to speak, and just want to remind you we're coming up against general council session at 6. So if we could just keep a few minutes on each. Thank you. Councillor Morbido.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I would say about 4 years ago, I didn't hear one complaint about this. Didn't even know people duck hunted over there. In the last 3 years, the amount of calls I've received alarmed me. I know Rosalie, Vincent, Councillor McKenna had legislation they were working on. So I patiently waited. And I looked at the legislation, and I think it's really detailed-oriented. My first instance, when I looked at this, my first concern was, at my first glance, I looked at it, I'm like, okay, well, these pellets, that we're pushing them back, are they going to just be wildfire and just shooting anywhere because they can't see? Does that endanger residents in that area? But after doing research, I realized the pellet guns can barely reach anyone shooting from 1,500 yards back. So I am in favor of this ordinance. Once again, it's not taking anyone's rights away. If anything, it's helping people in that area from being disturbed from the gunshots. I can't even imagine being in a residential area at night and all of a sudden you hear, really? I don't think our location is a place for it. So I commend Rosalie, Vincent, and Councilor McKenna for working on this.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Janino? Pardon me. Ladies first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. I just want to speak in favor of this and commend my colleague, Councilor McKenna, as well as our state delegation and Representative Vincent for really pushing for this and working to protect our residents. I won't be redundant and repeat what my colleagues have said, but I'm on board and I hope to see it go to the committee tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Council President Guanasso.
Oh, I'm going to be quick.
Yep.
Yeah.
300 yards in distance is a great distance. I've lived for over 50 years in the Martin Street, and right down the street, less than 300 yards away is the marsh. And I've been hearing pop, 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 pop all these years. And there are people out there enjoying it, and these people actually retrieve what they're shooting at, the fowl that they're shooting at. So I don't know what they do on the beachfront, and I certainly don't think I think we're protecting our people who utilize Revere Beach, and I think this is a great motion submitted by my colleague, and I think that what the leadership that the representative has within the legislature, that this will go forward, and makes common sense. And the only way that we can give a little safeguard to it is to place the fine on it. That shows a little bit of enforcement to it, and now we need to get the enforcement on it. So once this is passed, we want to make sure that it's enforced, and so that we prevent this from happening in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Councilor, for submitting such a nice motion.
Thank you, Council President. And just to wrap it up, I tend to agree with all the councils, and it seems like we're all very much in favor. When we have these ordinances and laws that were made in the colonial era, certainly they're not going to reflect what Revere is today. So I'd be asking the council for all in favor tonight, and then this would go to the general council after 6 o'clock. All in favor? Aye. Approved. That concludes our Legislative Affairs Subcommittee meeting. Everyone have a great night. Thank you.